15 minutes. That's all it took for 5-year-old Lila Monroe to disappear from the face of the earth. Lila vanished on May 2, 2015, during a relaxed Saturday barbecue at Willow Creek Retreat, a sprawling Christian charity facility tucked deep in the Ozark Mountains of southern Missouri. In less than a quarter of an hour, she became the focus of the largest missing child search in the state's history. Over the next 6 days, more than 1,200 law enforcement officers, firefighters, volunteers, and search and rescue teams combed nearly 5,000 acres of dense forest. They drained ponds, searched ravines, and turned over every rock and log within a 5-mile radius. They found nothing. No pink sneaker, no scrap of her mint green butterfly shirt, not a single neon yellow hair tie. 10 years later, the case remains unsolved. If she is still alive, Lila Monroe would be 16 years old now. Saturday, May 2nd, 2015, began like any other spring weekend for the Monroe family. Daniel and Rebecca Monroe, both in their late 30s, loaded their 4 children into their silver Ford Explorer for what was supposed to be an easy, familiar outing. They lived in Springfield, a mid-sized city in southwest Missouri, where Daniel worked as a high school history teacher and Rebecca was a part-time nurse at a local clinic. Their kids were Ethan, 15, Caleb, 13, Sophie, 8, and the baby of the family, 5-year-old Lila. The drive south took just under 2 hours, winding through the rolling hills and thick hardwood forests of the Ozarks until the pavement narrowed and the cell signal faded. Their destination was Willow Creek Retreat, a 300-acre Christian nonprofit near the tiny town of Willow Springs. The facility had been a fixture in the region for decades, run by a Baptist-affiliated charity that provided housing and therapy for people with disabilities, addiction recovery programs, and a small guest lodge for retreats and family gatherings. The Monroes had visited several times before. Rebecca's college roommate, Karen Whitaker, lived on site with her husband Tom and their 3 kids. The Whitakers managed one of the residential cottages, and the families had stayed close over the years. It was the kind of place where parents felt safe letting kids roam: playgrounds, open fields, hiking trails, and always plenty of adults around. That Saturday, 3 families were gathering for a casual cookout: the Monroes, the Whitakers, and another couple from Springfield with 2 kids. 9 kids in total, 6 adults. Nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, potato salad, and the kids running wild while the grown-ups caught up. Willow Creek Retreat wasn't just a retreat center, it was a working community. On any given day, around 90 people might be on the grounds: residents with developmental disabilities living in group homes, men and women in the addiction recovery program attending workshops, staff members, volunteers, and visiting family members. The property was open to the public, gates stayed unlocked, and locals often dropped by for church services or to use the ball fields. Just 4 miles down a gravel road sat the State Forensic Psychiatric Hospital, a maximum security facility housing violent offenders, including convicted sex predators. Most people at Willow Creek knew it was there, but no one ever talked about it much. By late afternoon, the adults started prepping for the barbecue. The grill area was set back near the tree line, about 100 yards from the Whitakers' cottage, along a well-worn dirt path bordered by wildflowers and young oaks. Daniel Monroe last saw Lila around 6:30 p.m. She was toddling down that path, proudly carrying 2 plastic bottles of water, one in each small hand, to help the grown-ups at the grill. Lila was easy to spot. She had long, light blonde hair worn in 2 slightly uneven pigtails tied with bright neon yellow scrunchies. Her eyes were a clear, curious blue. She wore a mint green long-sleeved shirt with ruffled shoulders and embroidered butterflies across the chest, pale jeans, and pink suede sneakers from a discount brand called Little Steps. The most distinctive thing about her, though, was the gap-toothed grin, both front top teeth missing, leaving an adorable window that made everyone smile back. Two other children, Karen Whitaker's 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old visitor, saw her a minute or two later. They watched her turn around on the path, heading back toward the cottage. She never made it. At roughly 6:45 p.m., Rebecca noticed something was off. She was in the Whitakers' kitchen, buttering hamburger buns, when she realized she hadn't seen Lila in a while. At first, it was just a flicker of unease. Kids wander, right? But when she stepped outside and called Lila's name, there was no answer. No little voice piping up from the playground. No flash of mint green among the trees. The families fanned out immediately. Daniel and Tom checked the grill area and the path. Rebecca and Karen circled the cottage and playground. The older kids were sent on bikes to scan the fields and trails. They shouted her name until their voices grew hoarse. An hour passed, then another. By 8:15 p.m., with the sun dipping behind the ridges and the spring air turning cool, Daniel made the call to 911. The first sheriff's deputy arrived at 8:27. Search dogs were on the grounds by 10 o'clock. To understand how thoroughly a child could vanish in such a short window, you have to picture Willow Creek Retreat itself. The property sprawled across rolling hills, bordered on 3 sides by thousands of acres of national forest. There were multiple residences, a chapel, administrative offices, a dining hall, and several residential cottages for long-term guests. Further back, spread across the rolling terrain, were group homes for adults with developmental disabilities, workshop buildings for the addiction recovery program, staff members, volunteers, and visiting family members. The property was open to the public. Gates stayed unlocked, and locals often dropped by for church services or to use the ball fields. Just 4 miles down a gravel road sat the State Forensic Psychiatric Hospital, a maximum security facility housing violent offenders, including convicted sex predators. Most people at Willow Creek knew it was there, but no one ever talked about it much. As the first deputies arrived and flashlights began sweeping the darkening woods, the reality settled in. A 5-year-old girl carrying water to help her family had walked down an open path in broad daylight and vanished completely. The nightmare was only beginning. Where are you watching this video from? Leave your location in the comments below. I'm always curious how far these stories can travel and how they manage to connect us across every distance. And now, let's continue the story. Willow Creek Retreat was the kind of place that felt safe precisely because it was supposed to be a sanctuary. Nestled in a narrow valley between 2 forested ridges, the property covered roughly 300 acres of cleared fields and thick second-growth timber. A single gravel road wound in from the county highway, passing a small wooden sign that read, "Willow Creek Retreat, Healing in Christ's Love." There were no fences, no gates, no security cameras. The philosophy was openness. Anyone seeking help or simply a quiet place to pray was welcome. The main buildings clustered near the entrance, a chapel with white clapboard siding, administrative offices, a dining hall, and several residential cottages for long-term guests. Further back, spread across the rolling terrain, were group homes for adults with developmental disabilities, workshop buildings for the addiction recovery program, staff members, volunteers, and visiting family members. The property was open to the public. Gates stayed unlocked, and locals often dropped by for church services or to use the ball fields. Just 4 miles down a gravel road sat the State Forensic Psychiatric Hospital, a maximum security facility housing violent offenders, including convicted sex predators. Most people at Willow Creek knew it was there, but no one ever talked about it much. As the first deputies arrived and flashlights began sweeping the darkening woods, the reality settled in. A 5-year-old girl carrying water to help her family had walked down an open path in broad daylight and vanished completely. The nightmare was only beginning. On a typical Saturday in May, the place buzzed with quiet activity. Residents might be tending vegetable gardens as part of occupational therapy. Recovery patients could be in group sessions or working in the wood shop. Staff vehicles came and went, Visitors arrived for weekend retreats or to see family members. By conservative estimates, 90 to 100 people could be on the property at any given time, and on May 2, 2015, it was likely closer to 100. The open-door policy was part of the mission, but it also meant that tracking every person's movements was nearly impossible. When Rebecca Monroe realized Lila was missing, the first searches were frantic but informal. Daniel jogged the dirt path between the cottage and the grill area 3 times, calling her name. Tom Whitaker checked the playground in the nearby barn where kids sometimes played hide-and-seek among the hay bales. Karen and Rebecca knocked on doors at neighboring cottages, asking if anyone had seen a little blonde girl in pink shoes. The older kids, Ethan, Caleb, Sophie, and the Whitaker children, were sent out on bicycles, fanning across the fields and trails. They shouted "Lila" until the Ozark hills echoed it back. Nothing. By 7:30 p.m., the adults had gathered everyone they could find on the grounds, staff members, a few residents who were out walking, visiting families, and asked them to help look. Flashlights came out as dusk settled. Someone drove the gravel roads in a golf cart, shining a spotlight into the tree line. At 8:15 p.m., Daniel placed the 911 call from the Whitakers' landline. Cell service was spotty in the valley, and he didn't want to risk a dropped call. He stayed calm on the phone, giving the dispatcher Lila's description, what she was wearing, and the exact timeline. The dispatcher assured him units were on the way. The first Howell County Sheriff's deputy arrived at 8:27 p.m., followed quickly by 2 more. Missouri State Highway Patrol troopers showed up by 8:45. Within an hour, the gravel parking lot filled with marked SUVs, canine units, and volunteer fire department trucks from Willow Springs and nearby Mountain View. Search dogs, bloodhounds, and trailing dogs from 3 different agencies were on site by 10 p.m. Handlers started them at the dirt path where Lila was last seen. The dogs worked the area methodically, noses to the ground, GPS collars tracking their every movement. What the handlers found, or rather didn't find, would shape the entire investigation. The dogs picked up Lila's scent easily along the path. They traced her earlier movements from that afternoon, where she had ridden her bike with Sophie near the playground, where she had played on the swings, where she had walked with her father toward the grill area carrying the water bottles. But after the point where the other children saw her turn back toward the cottage, the trail simply stopped. No deviation into the woods, no loop back to the playground, no scent leading to any building or vehicle. The dogs showed no alert indicating she had been carried. If someone had picked her up and walked away, the bloodhounds should have followed that path. They didn't. Handlers ran the dogs again and again, starting from different points, using different articles of Lila's clothing for scent. Same result. Her trail ended abruptly on the open path, roughly halfway between the cottage and the grill area. By midnight, a Missouri State Highway Patrol helicopter was overhead, equipped with forward-looking infrared, FLIR cameras. The thermal imaging swept grid patterns across the forest and fields. It picked up deer, raccoons, a few residents walking back to their cottages, but no small heat signature that could be a lost or injured child. Ground teams formed hasty search lines, walking shoulder to shoulder through the fields and along the forest edge with flashlights. Volunteers from the local fire departments and nearby churches began arriving. Someone set up coffee and sandwiches in the dining hall for searchers. Rebecca sat on the Whitakers' porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, though the night wasn't particularly cold. She kept replaying the afternoon in her mind, buttering buns, glancing out the window, assuming Lila was playing nearby. Daniel paced the gravel driveway, phone to his ear, coordinating with arriving officers. The older children were kept inside the cottage, huddled on the couch under Karen's watchful eye. Ethan, the 15-year-old, stared silently out the window. Caleb kept asking when they would find her. Sophie cried quietly, clutching Lila's favorite stuffed rabbit that someone had found on the playground. As the hours stretched into the early morning of May 3, 2015, the reality began to sink in for everyone involved. This wasn't a child who had wandered off and gotten turned around in the woods. The property wasn't that isolated, the path wasn't that hidden, and the timeline was too short. A 5-year-old carrying water bottles had walked into the open on a Saturday evening, surrounded by dozens of people, and vanished without a trace. What followed the disappearance of Lila Monroe was unprecedented in Missouri history. By sunrise on Sunday, May 3, 2015, the search had exploded into a full-scale mobilization. The Howell County Sheriff's Office, Missouri State Highway Patrol, FBI, and National Guard coordinated what would become the largest missing child operation the state had ever seen. Over the next 6 days, more than 1,200 personnel, sheriff's deputies, troopers, federal agents, firefighters, and volunteer fire department trucks from Willow Springs and nearby Mountain View descended on Willow Creek Retreat and the surrounding Ozark wilderness. They covered an area equivalent to nearly 5,000 acres, roughly 7 square miles of dense forest, ravines, creeks, and abandoned logging roads. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft flew constant grids. ATVs and horseback teams pushed into areas too rough for vehicles. Dive teams waited on standby. Every body of water within a reasonable radius was systematically drained or searched. The main fishing pond behind the retreat's chapel was pumped dry, revealing nothing but mud and a few startled turtles. Smaller irrigation ponds scattered through the woods were treated the same way. A slurry pit near the maintenance barns, a fire suppression pond, even seasonal creeks swollen from recent rain, all were checked by divers before being drained. Nothing. No clothing, no shoes, no trace of Lila. Every building on the Willow Creek property was searched room by room, attic to basement, group homes, therapy workshops, staff residences, the chapel, storage sheds, even locked maintenance closets. A large hay barn was emptied by hand, volunteers and deputies pitching bale by bale into trucks so the floor could be probed for disturbed earth. Cadaver dogs walked the interiors. Thermal cameras scanned walls and ceilings for hidden voids. Again, nothing. 40 search dogs from agencies across Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma were deployed, many equipped with GPS trackers that created digital maps of their movements. The data painted a clear picture of Lila's activities earlier that day. Loops around the playground, a trip to the swings with Sophie, the walk toward the grill area with her father carrying the water bottles. But after the point where the other children saw her turn back toward the cottage, the trail simply stopped. No continuous scent leading deeper into the forest. No indication she had doubled back or hidden in a building. The bloodhounds, renowned for following even faint trails, showed no alert anywhere on the grounds. If someone had carried her, conscious or unconscious, the dogs should have tracked the path to a vehicle or hiding spot. They didn't. By Wednesday, May 6th, 4 days after Lila vanished, the tone of official updates began to shift. At a press conference outside the retreat's chapel, the lead investigator from the Missouri State Highway Patrol, Captain Mark Ellison, told reporters that while they had not given up hope of finding Lila alive, foul play is increasingly considered the most likely scenario. He explained why. If Lila had simply wandered into the woods and succumbed to exposure or injury, something should have turned up by now. The thermal imaging from the first night would have detected her body heat. The dogs would have found her scent trail. The grid searches, covering thousands of acres on foot, would have located clothing, shoes, or remains. Instead, there was only absence. One detail emerged that chilled investigators and would haunt the case for years. Scent dogs working a grid about 30 miles north, near a rest area off Interstate 44, picked up what handlers believed was Lila's trail. The dogs followed it toward the highway on-ramp, then along the interstate corridor in the direction of St. Louis, before losing it amid traffic and exhaust. Highway patrol temporarily closed shoulders and exits while teams followed the dogs, but the trail faded. The implication was unmistakable. Someone may have placed Lila in a vehicle and driven her away from Willow Creek before anyone even knew she was missing. In that narrow 15-minute window, while adults chatted at the grill and buttered buns, a predator could have acted, loaded her into a car parked on one of the retreat's many access roads, and been miles away by the time the family started calling her name. No item of Lila's clothing was ever recovered. Not the mint green butterfly shirt, not the pale jeans, not the pink Little Step sneakers, not the neon yellow scrunchies. Early in the search, a volunteer found a child's hair tie in the grass near the playground. Hope flared briefly until DNA testing confirmed it belonged to one of the Whitaker children. No physical evidence turned up anywhere. No crime scene was ever definitively identified. Despite draining ponds, emptying barns, and searching thousands of acres with every tool available, investigators could not point to a single location where Lila had been harmed, hidden, or even passed through after 6:45 p.m. on May 2. A local hunter came forward with a report that would linger in the file. Around dusk that evening, he claimed to have heard a child's brief, sharp cry deep in the woods east of the retreat. Search teams and dogs were dispatched immediately. They found no disturbance, no scent, no sign anyone had been there. Another detail seemed minor at the time, but would gain significance later. A maintenance worker mentioned seeing a white cargo van, unfamiliar to him, leaving down a back gravel lane around the time the barbecue was starting. He couldn't recall make, model, or license plate, just that it was white, and it struck him as odd because most delivery vans came earlier in the day. In the first week, investigators interviewed every person known to have been on the property that Saturday: staff, residents, recovery patients, visitors. More than 100 statements taken, many multiple times. Background checks were run on anyone with a criminal history, no matter how minor. Registered sex offenders living within a 100-mile radius were located and alibied. Vehicles owned by staff or frequent visitors were examined for trace evidence. The white cargo van sighting gained early traction. The maintenance worker who reported it was brought in for a formal statement. He described it as a plain white panel van, no markings, traveling slowly down a service lane that led to the back of the property around 6:30 to 7 p.m. He couldn't recall the driver or any distinguishing features, but the timing matched the window of Lila's disappearance. Investigators canvassed nearby gas stations and convenience stores for surveillance footage of white vans. They checked registration records for similar vehicles owned by anyone connected to Willow Creek. Nothing definitive emerged. Another thread pulled at investigators from the beginning: the State Forensic Psychiatric Hospital 4 miles away. Could a patient have wandered off? Could someone with access have been on the retreat grounds? Hospital administrators cooperated fully. No escapes, no patients missing, no staff unaccounted for. Still, the proximity hung over the case like a shadow. As weeks turned into months, attention shifted to known predators in the region. Tips flooded hotlines: a suspicious man seen near a playground in Springfield, a white van parked oddly outside a Walmart in West Plains, a child matching Lila's description reported across the Midwest. Each was investigated thoroughly. Each led to nowhere. The lack of physical evidence continued to frustrate everyone. No DNA, no fibers, no fingerprints, no discarded clothing caught on brush. Cadaver dogs returned repeatedly to areas the tracking dogs had covered, searching for decomposition. Ground-penetrating radar scanned for disturbed soil that might indicate a shallow grave. Nothing. In the fall of 2015, a new lead surfaced that briefly electrified the task force. A convicted sex offender named Ron or Ronnie Carver lived in a rundown trailer about 40 miles west of Willow Creek, near the town of Kabul. Carver, then 52, had a history dating back to the 1990s, multiple convictions for child molestation and failure to register. On May 1, 2015, the day before Lila vanished, he was involved in a minor fender bender at a highway rest area just 30 miles from the retreat.
More importantly, Carver owned a white Ford Econoline van. Neighbors reported seeing him washing it repeatedly in the days after May 2, using bleach on the interior. When investigators executed a search warrant in October 2015, they found children's clothing that didn't belong to any known relative and a collection of child pornography on an old computer. Carver became the first major person of interest. For weeks, the task force focused on him. His van was impounded and processed. His property was searched with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. His alibi for May 2, he claimed to have been home alone watching television, was shaky at best. But cell phone data ultimately undermined the case against him. Records showed Carver's phone pinging towers near his trailer throughout the evening of May 2. While not impossible to leave a phone behind, the data, combined with no physical evidence linking him or his van to Lila, led prosecutors to back away. Carver was charged separately for the pornography and parole violations, but never for Lila's disappearance. The task force moved on, but the pattern was set. Promising suspects would emerge based on criminal history and circumstantial ties, only to be cleared by alibis or lack of evidence. Another name that surfaced early was Martin Ellis, a 38-year-old drifter who had done odd jobs at Willow Creek in the months before May 2015. Ellis had a record for indecent exposure and lived in a converted school bus parked on rural property near Mountain Grove. Witnesses vaguely recalled seeing him around the retreat on weekends, doing maintenance work. When investigators tracked him down in early 2016, they found disturbing items in his bus: children's toys, restraints, and notebooks filled with obsessive writings about young girls. A search of an abandoned shed he had access to revealed mattresses and sound-dampening material installed in bizarre ways. Ellis was questioned extensively, but like Carver, he had phone records placing him elsewhere on May 2, and no physical evidence tied him to Lila. The investigation into him fizzled after a few months. By the end of 2016, the task force had chased hundreds of leads, interviewed thousands of people, and generated a case file that already filled dozens of binders. Media coverage had been intense at first: Lila's gap-toothed photo on every local news broadcast, comparisons to other high-profile missing child cases, but the story began to fade from front pages. For the Monroes, there was no fading. They returned to their home in Springfield, trying to rebuild some semblance of routine for Ethan, Caleb, and Sophie. Rebecca avoided Willow Creek Retreat entirely. The thought of driving past the sign made her physically ill. Daniel admitted to friends that he no longer trusted the place or many of the people there, a lingering unease he couldn't shake. The questions remained the same as they had been on that first night. How could a child disappear from an open path in broad daylight? Who could have taken her without leaving a trace? And where was Lila now? The investigation had ruled out accident and exposure. It had chased every early lead to its conclusion, but it had not produced answers. The case was settling into the long, uncertain territory of the unsolved. The disappearance of Lila Monroe didn't just take a child from the family. It slowly dismantled everything else. In the first months after May 2, 2015, the Monroes tried to hold on to normalcy for the sake of their 3 remaining children. They returned to their split-level house in a quiet Springfield neighborhood, where Lila's room remained untouched, her stuffed animals lined up on the bed,
her tiny pink sneakers still by the door. Ethan went back to high school, Caleb to middle school, Sophie to 3rd grade. Daniel returned to teaching history at Central High. Rebecca cut her nursing shifts to part-time, but nothing felt normal. Rebecca couldn't drive past Willow Creek Retreat without pulling over to cry. She avoided the Whitakers for a while, not out of blame, but because every conversation circled back to that day. When she did return to the retreat once for a memorial vigil in 2016, she described it to a reporter as that terrible place. She swore she would never go back. Daniel carried a quieter anger. In interviews, he spoke of a lingering mistrust toward the retreat and some of the people there. "I can't shake the feeling that something was off," he said in 2017. Whether it was intuition or trauma, the place where he last saw his daughter carrying water bottles had become poisoned in his mind. The older children coped in their own ways. Ethan, 15 when Lila vanished, withdrew into video games and sports, rarely speaking about his sister. Caleb, 13, asked questions no one could answer. Why didn't the dogs find her? Why didn't anyone hear anything? Sophie, 8, drew pictures of Lila in heaven, were sometimes still playing on the swings. Family counselors noted that all 3 siblings seemed to hold a private belief that Lila was alive somewhere, living with another family, a gentler narrative than the alternatives. The strain between Daniel and Rebecca grew steadily. They attended support groups for parents of missing children, where they heard the grim statistics: more than 70% of such marriages end in separation or divorce. At first, they vowed to beat the odds, but the uncertainty was corrosive. Rebecca clung to hope. In a 2017 interview with a local television station, she said, "My heart tells me she's still out there. We have to believe she's okay wherever she is." She kept Lila's room as a shrine, refreshed the missing posters, and checked the dedicated tip website daily. Daniel's hope darkened earlier. By 2018, he admitted to friends, "I still pray they'll find her, but the chance she's coming home alive, that feels close to zero." The difference in their outlooks made every conversation about Lila painful, one parent grasping for light, the other bracing for the worst. By 2019, the couple separated. They remained civil for the children, sharing custody and holidays, but the marriage could not survive the weight of not knowing. Media attention helped keep the case alive, but exacted its own price. Lila's photo, gap-toothed smile, pigtails with yellow scrunchies, appeared on billboards along Missouri interstates, on national shows like Dateline in 2020, and in age-progressed images showing what she might look like at 10, 12, 14. Each anniversary brought a fresh wave of coverage, forcing the family to relive the worst day of their lives in public. Tips continued to trickle in, more than 2,000 in the first 5 years. Sightings in Texas, Florida, California. A girl resembling the age progression in a Walmart surveillance photo. A tip about a couple raising a child who didn't look like them. Every credible lead was followed. Every one ended in disappointment. The Missouri State Highway Patrol offered a reward that grew over time, eventually reaching $25,000, the highest ever for a missing child case in the state. National organizations added funds, but no breakthrough came. The children grew up in the shadow of absence. Ethan graduated high school in 2018, quiet and reserved. Caleb threw himself into baseball. Sophie, who had been closest in age to Lila, struggled most openly. Nightmares, anxiety, therapy sessions. All 3 avoided talking about their sister in public, but privately they maintained a shared story. Lila was safe, living with people who loved her.
For Rebecca, the uncertainty was the cruelest part. "Not knowing is worse than anything," she told a support group in 2020. Is she alive, suffering, happy, dead? The questions never stopped. Daniel focused on the practical, pushing investigators to re-interview people from Willow Creek, to dig deeper into the facility itself. He never lost the conviction that someone there knew more than they had said. As the 5th anniversary approached in 2020, the family marked another grim milestone. The kids were teenagers now. The house felt too big. The marriage was over. And Lila, if alive, would be 10 years old, a decade removed from the little girl with missing front teeth. The case had settled into the long, quiet agony of the unresolved. Tips slowed. Media interest waned. The task force, though still active, had fewer resources. But for the Monroes, time did not heal. It only stretched the wound wider. As the case entered its second decade, fresh scrutiny and new technology began to breathe life into leads that had once been considered closed. In early 2021, a development from an unrelated investigation sent ripples through the Lila Monroe task force. A German national named Klaus Becker, already serving time in Europe for unrelated sexual assaults, became the prime suspect in a high-profile European missing child case from years earlier. Becker had lived transiently across the U.S. in the early 2000s, including stints in the Midwest doing seasonal work. More importantly, Becker had been in southern Missouri in the spring of 2015. On May 1, the day before Lila vanished, he was involved in a traffic stop near Branson, about 90 miles from Willow Creek. He drove a white Mercedes Sprinter van registered in his name until 2016. The van had been modified with hidden compartments in the floor and walls, spaces large enough to conceal a person. When the connection to the European case broke internationally, reporters began drawing parallels to Lila. Becker had no verified alibi for May 2, 2015. The white van sighting at Willow Creek carried new weight. The task force reopened the file on Becker aggressively. In April 2024, Missouri investigators, working with federal authorities, located the Sprinter van, now owned by a third party in Arkansas. It was seized for advanced forensic testing. Modern techniques could detect trace DNA even after years and multiple owners. Results were never publicly disclosed. The silence fueled speculation. Either nothing was found, or something was found but held back for an ongoing probe. No charges were filed in Lila's case. Becker faced separate trials in Europe for other crimes, but was acquitted on most counts. He completed his remaining sentence and was released in late 2024 with electronic monitoring. The lack of charges in Lila's disappearance frustrated the family, but cell phone data from 2015 continued to place his phone far from Willow Creek that evening, a detail prosecutors still considered strong. By 2023, 8 years in, the case had generated criticism. Questions arose about early investigative decisions, leads pursued too briefly, files disorganized, potential conflicts of interest. In May 2023, the Missouri Attorney General's office announced a major shift. The investigation would transfer from the original Highway Patrol Task Force to a specialized cold case unit in Jefferson City. The new unit, 8 experienced investigators, began with a complete review. They digitized the entire file, more than 40,000 pages of statements, reports, and tips scanned and indexed for searchable analysis. Patterns that had been buried in paper volumes began to emerge. Renewed searches followed. In March 2024, over 60 officers returned to the forests around Willow Creek with updated ground-penetrating radar and thermal drones. Areas once too dense were now more accessible as seasons changed. In October, divers searched a silted pond 3 miles away that had been overlooked in 2015. Nothing new turned up. In November 2024, an innovative awareness campaign launched.
A national smoothie brand partnered with the Cold Case Unit to print Lila's childhood photo alongside an age-progressed image of her at 15 on tens of thousands of bottles distributed across the Midwest. Bottles included case details, the tip line, and a $25,000 contribution that doubled the existing reward to $50,000. The campaign generated dozens of new tips in weeks. Whether any would prove valuable remained uncertain, but it reminded the public and potential witnesses that someone, somewhere, might still hold the key. As 2025 approached, the 10-year anniversary, the Cold Case Unit conducted winter searches using advanced thermal drones capable of detecting anomalies through canopy and snow. They focused on decomposed clothing or skeletal remains, acknowledging the passage of time. Again, the Ozark wilderness yielded nothing. The transfer to the Cold Case Unit represented both an admission of past shortcomings and a commitment to fresh eyes. Investigators re-interviewed aging witnesses, applied new forensic tools to old evidence, and chased tips with modern digital tracing. For the Monroe family, these developments brought cautious hope mixed with familiar pain. Rebecca, now living separately but still active in advocacy, welcomed the renewed effort. Daniel pushed for deeper focus on the retreat itself. 10 years in, the case had suspects investigated and cleared, searches exhaustive and fruitless, rewards substantial and unclaimed. But it also had persistence, a dedicated unit, advancing technology, and a family refusing to let the mystery die. The questions endured, but so did the investigation. May 2, 2025 marked exactly 10 years since Lila Monroe vanished. A decade had passed from that ordinary Saturday barbecue, since a 5-year-old girl with pigtails and missing front teeth walked down a dirt path carrying water bottles and never reached the other end. If alive, Lila would now be 16, a teenager with a life, memories, and experiences far removed from the little girl frozen in photographs. The age-progressed images created for the smoothie campaign showed a young woman with longer blonde hair, more defined features, but still those same clear blue eyes. The images were both hopeful and haunting, a reminder of who she might have become and of how much time had been stolen. For Rebecca Monroe, the 10th anniversary brought another wave of media interviews and quiet grief. "The not knowing is the worst part," she told a local reporter. "It doesn't get easier with time. It just becomes a different kind of pain." Daniel Monroe's perspective remained unchanged from years earlier. He still hoped Lila would be found, but the prospect of finding her alive felt remote. 10 years was a lifetime for a child taken at 5. Statistics on long-term missing children were unforgiving. Recovery alive after a decade was exceptionally rare. The Cold Case Unit in Jefferson City continued its work. 8 investigators reviewed the digitized file daily, chasing new tips from the smoothie campaign and applying forensic advances to old evidence. They had confirmed much of the original investigation's thoroughness, while quietly acknowledging gaps, leads that deserved more follow-up, decisions influenced by the pressures of the moment. Certain facts, established early and never disproven, anchored the case. Lila was last seen alive around 6:30 p.m. on May 2, 2015, on the open path at Willow Creek Retreat. She never arrived at either end of that path. The largest search in Missouri history found no trace of her, no clothing, no remains, no personal items. Tracking dogs lost her scent midway on the path, with no trail into the forest or to any building. A possible scent trail picked up 30 miles away suggested vehicle transport. Key suspects, like Klaus Becker, had been investigated and effectively cleared, by phone records or lack of evidence. Yet the core mysteries remained untouched. Who took Lila from that path? How did they do it without alerting anyone or leaving evidence? Was she lured willingly, perhaps by someone posing as helpful, or taken by force without a sound? Was her body hidden in the vast Ozark wilderness in a spot missed by 14 separate searches? Or had she been driven away, buried far from Missouri, or, against all odds, kept alive somewhere? The white van remained a tantalizing but elusive clue, common enough to be untraceable, specific enough to suggest opportunity. Investigators still sought anyone who saw a vehicle leaving the retreat between 6:30 and 8 that evening. Daniel Monroe continued to believe the answer lay closer to Willow Creek itself, someone on the grounds that day who knew the layout, the routines, the blind spots. Rebecca focused on the possibility Lila was alive, raised under another name, perhaps never knowing her true family. The $50,000 reward stood, the highest ever offered in a Missouri missing child case. The tip website remained active. The cold case unit prioritized vehicle sightings, potential insider involvement, and any new forensic angle on preserved evidence. Comparisons to other long-term cases lingered, some resolved after decades through confessions or DNA breakthroughs. Others never did. Lila's case could still go either way. For criminologists, it raised uncomfortable questions. How could a child vanish from daylight, from a populated place, without a single piece of physical evidence? For the public, it served as a stark reminder of vulnerability, of how quickly safety can shatter. For the Monroe family, now scattered, scarred, but still bound by loss, the case was life suspended. Ethan, Caleb, and Sophie had grown into young adults, building lives while carrying absence. Rebecca and Daniel, though long separated, shared the same unanswered questions. Someone knows what happened to Lila Monroe. That person has lived with the knowledge for 10 years, through searches, headlines, rewards, and anniversaries. Circumstances change, guilt accumulates, secrets surface. Cold cases break when silence finally ends. Until then, the investigation continues, the questions endure, and a family waits for a truth that may never come. Lila Monroe would turn 17 in August 2026. The search goes on.
Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next videos, where we continue to follow the mysteries that have never slept. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned